pretend that the US dollar is real, what you could say about the Federal Reserve, they have a checking account with zero in it that they write checks on to buy treasury bonds, and by law, those checks don't bounce. Given that I think the entire modern financial system is a big Keynesian magic money tree Ponzi scheme, I do expect that the day will come when people turn to crypto. Told you to snap up a modest position of currency minted from factoring digits. Which of you listen?
I'm here at Porcfest with Patrick Byrne, CEO of Overstock.com. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Naomi, such an honor to be on.
Blockchain is obviously really great for circumventing government or giving more freedom back to people. What role do you think that government has in regulating cryptocurrency or blockchain tech in general?
Well, I guess I must confess, as revolutionary as I am, I'm I guess what you could call a national security libertarian. So I worry about threats to our country. And that means that KYC and AML are not just things to be scoffed at. I wish that they it's to catch criminals, and a lot of things they call crime, I don't call crime. I don't think smoking pot should be a crime as such. So in that sense, I'm not on their side in terms of why they think they need to control being able to look at where every dollar moves. But I think there's a legitimate interest in society and having KYC and AML. I got to tell you, there's a lot of bad guys out there. We can take blockchain to the point where it really becomes anonymous. If you do that, there's going to be a lot of criminals and dangerous kind of people who get an edge over those of us who, I'm not on the side of crime. I mean, well, like I say, there's a lot of things that they call crime that I wish they didn't call crime, victimless crimes. Things people voluntarily choose to do. That's not a crime. But I do worry that this, could be used by bad actors to evade legitimate law enforcement.
So who draws that line between what should be legal, what should not be legal? Because currently, a lot of people want to get away from the traditional financial system because it enables the government to freeze accounts of people, who contribute to causes they don't agree with or who are doing things that they don't think are right. Even if it's not even illegal, they can freeze accounts.
Ultimately, it comes down to as long as there's a KYC element, when it gets truly anonymous, it's going to, on the one hand, I love the idea of it becoming completely free and anonymous, and I know good people like you and me will use it to, great ends, and we won't hurt anybody. But there are other people who will hurt people. I don't want Kim Jong-un to be able to move money around the world without it being able to be spotted. He's got a lot of bad things in mind.
Do you see governments becoming progressively worse as they get more technology in their control? Do you think we're moving towards a more totalitarian state where blockchain tech could be used for bad things by government actors?
Yes, I do. The more the world gets digitized, the more there will be government surveillance. If you want to avoid that, you're going to be going back to physical coins and such. I worry a lot about things, for example, I'll tell you, the things that are happening in China. I'm surprised our movement is not more awake to this possibility. We crypto anarchists want to remake society out of this technology. Is that going to work? Can we afford to have an authoritarian state own the underlying technology? By that I mean China. It's an authoritarian state. Can they own the underlying technology? That scares the hell out of me. If the underlying technology to our crypto revolution is made in China, it means ultimately Xi Jinping controls the world. And I don't think that's a situation I want to see. They're now doing crazy stuff in China. They're doing stuff where they're coming up with a score of how good a citizen you are, an index, and it's using machine learning, and it's based on what sites you visit and who you talk to and how often you talk to them and who you send emails with and what you read. And it all gets factored into one good citizen score. And if you're a good citizen, it means you get to stand first in line and take good flights. If you're not a good citizen, you're going to be moved out of your apartments. Your kids don't get into college. So eventually, they're there now. It's at the point where they're going to make it impossible for political dissident to even think. You can't even go to the sites. If you start going to the wrong sites, you're going to find, you're losing your job, or your pay's late, or you don't get to take certain flights, or you can't go see certain movies because you're not a good citizen. It's all being derived through machine learning. I think that's a really scary thing.
Yeah, it's also difficult to separate, financial privacy from privacy in the rest of your life. So if the state has the ability to track your finances and where you're spending everything, then it just gives them a whole lot of control over people. Like, what do you think of the regulation that was just passed in Australia, where they want to make it illegal for sums of over $10,000 AUD to be made in cash? They want all of those transactions to be digital. Do you think that's problematic for a person's financial privacy?
Yeah, of course it is. I can think of a lot of good uses that one can put $11,000 of Australian cash that you wouldn't want, the government doesn't have any legitimate interest in knowing about. So,
I mean, if we're in a state like that, I see privacy coins as having such a great function, because you don't necessarily want the government to know what your $11,000 transaction is. It may not be illegal, but you still might not want them to know about it.
Yeah, but you also don't want Zakari or Osama bin Laden or Kim Jong-un to be able to move money around, I think, without... there are legitimate security threats. The libertarian movement has embraced everybody who sounds anti-government. I'm afraid that sometimes makes them seem somewhat gullible to me. It's a nasty world. It's a tough world. Snowden, before Snowden did what he did, and this is all the public, the U.S. used to have, evidently, if you can believe what's reported in the press, used to have like a 25-minute edge that if the North Koreans had gone to launch missiles, we actually would have known about it 25 minutes in advance. Because Snowden published what he published and showed them the leaks that they had, they got to seal that up. So now, states, and it's not just North Korea, it was Russia too, that we had a warning. We had some system in their computers. It was reported that if they had started mobilizing their missiles and such, we'd have known 25 minutes before they fired. And then after Snowden's revelation, well, I kind of wish we did have 25 minutes warning before they fired missiles. I think that was a bad thing for Snowden to do. I'm as distrustful of government as anyone. I believe in the Constitution. I'm not an anarchist, though, and we live in a nasty world. So I don't want to see swept away the ability of liberal societies to defend themselves. And the threats that we face are not all, battleships coming at us. So I think we have to be a little careful. Even I know that may be anathema to your young and optimistic ears, but it's a nasty world.
I see it being very problematic how we make decisions about the trade-off between freedom and security. Who gets to make those decisions? Are they set by laws? Are they set by men, depending on the circumstances? It seems like it's a very difficult call to make.
Well, it is a difficult call, and the people should decide. Ultimately, the people should decide it. So take, for example, in America, your cell phones. The government technologically would be possible, so they could listen in on everything and keep records of everything. Or they could do nothing. Or they had a system for a while where they capture the metadata. And that was really so they could reconstruct, if there was an incident, they could trace it back and find everyone who'd been involved. Now, and so they're not recorded, they're not finding out the content of what you were communicating on your phone, but they do know that if you called Bill on such and such a date, that they were keeping that metadata. Well, that all broke in the press because of Snowden and such. The lawyers, the government lawyers, what they decided was they're on that spectrum between listening to everything and listening to nothing and capturing nothing. We're going to capture just the record, the metadata of who people talk to. Well, society has basically said, we don't want that. That's too much. So they're moving it this way. And what will happen, maybe it'll be just fine, or maybe there'll be a nuke go off in New York City, and then people are going to say, maybe this was the right balance. I don't pretend to know what the right balance is. I just think that what the right trade-off is. But I think that people ought to understand that there is a trade-off, and maybe we'll find it by trial and error, and maybe some of those errors we'll see nukes, nukes hit cities, and then at some point we'll say, well, maybe we can stand this much surveillance, but not more. I don't know. It's difficult. I mean, they're tough questions, and I don't pretend to know. I don't know if capturing metadata was the right answer. That does seem intrusive. Sure seems intrusive today. Not sure after 9/11. I remember a lot of people I knew in New York, a lot of people who are now the kind of folks who are, beat their chests about how awful that is. Boy, after 9/11, they would have tolerated anything. They would have tolerated any. So maybe it's just going to come in waves.
I want to circle back to Bitcoin in particular. What do you think are the main barriers to mainstream adoption? Are they social barriers, tech barriers, government barriers?
Yes.
Excellent. Moving on.
Well, the social barriers, it's got to be made simpler than it is now for people. And there's stigmatization. There's really stigmatization. It's hilarious watching I used to think that they just weren't very smart, the mainstream.
I still think that.
Yeah. It is kind of shocking. When I think of the people I knew who went into journalism, to be honest, from college, it was a couple really smart people and then a lot of people who were just one notch above us football players. I was a college football player, and we're at the bottom of that totem pole. But they just stigmatize it, they're just like lemmings, or they're repeating what they're told. That hey, it's used for ecstasy dealing and such. Well, last thing I checked, the U.S. dollar was used for ecstasy dealing, and it doesn't make that evil. So the stigma is a big thing. The government's getting comfortable with it. The government, from our interactions with regulators regarding all this Wall Street stuff and other, I think I think European and U.S., let's say Western governments are understanding it can't be stopped. But I think what happened in China last year, I think they have figured out in authoritarian countries. I actually heard that in China they figured out that if they don't stop it, that within 10 years it would be the end of the regime. And so they really have done a lot in the last 9 months they understand the power of blockchain, but I think they're quite afraid of the cryptocurrency movement. It gives people a way to communicate and to do things outside of central institutions.
Mm-hmm. It's very scary for a lot of governments who want to hold that power. Do you see Bitcoin becoming a worldwide currency, or do you think it'll always just have a specialty use?
People turn to it where they collapse, like Venezuela or Cyprus or Syria, something. That's when people start getting into it, is when their own financial system is collapsing. So yes, given that I think the entire modern financial system is a big Keynesian magic money tree Ponzi scheme, I do expect that the day will come when people turn to crypto. Now, whether Bitcoin is the one, whether Bitcoin has solved its speed problems, or it's another cryptocurrency, only time will tell.
Mm-hmm. It's always ironic when government narrative is that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme when they're the ones who created the Medicaid and
central banking.
Yeah.
Pretend that the U.S. dollar is real. What you could say about the Federal Reserve is that it is loaning the United States Treasury fake money, and we're paying back real money. Now, we can all dispute are any dollars real, but we have an agent in our society who's been given a special patent, a special privilege. They get to loan our government fake money. They have a checking account with zero in it that they write checks on to buy treasury bonds, and by law, those checks don't bounce. So that's kind of in astronomical terms, what a nebula is, where the stars come out of. That's the Crab Nebula of the global financial system. There's a specific checking account that the United States Federal Reserve has that by law is never overdrawn, and they just buy. So they're creating fake money. But then when the time comes 4 years later, 10 years later, to pay off that bond, we Americans get taxed real money, dollars, and go and pays them back. Now, in a sense, we can all say the dollars aren't real either, but that's some private company, private entity has that right. Doesn't seem. I'd love the right to be able to create fake money, loan it to the United States government, and have them have to pay me back with real dollars. Well, why do we have does that sound like a good idea?
I'd love that ability too. Can we all get that ability?
Now get this. The group that has that is a private corporation, and no one knows who owns it. No one knows who owns the Federal Reserve. It's like you can find out the nuclear launch codes before you find that out. So Ron Paul was right. Let's get to the bottom of that.
Well, thank you very much for chatting with me. This has been wonderful, and I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you so much, Naomi.
If you like my channel, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. I also have a Patreon account and wanted to give a special shout out to all the awesome people there. And a huge thank you to the sponsors of the show for making these videos possible. Thanks so much for watching.
She used to just party, go all the way.